How's it going? Today we're going to look at a few different sort of introductory books on Buddhism, because I find, and this was my experience as well, people who are interested in Buddhism or are coming to it for the first time, you know, whether that's for a like intellectual sort of like study reason, or if it's for like a spiritual reason, or if it's just for interest's sake, or some combination of things. Usually the first thing that people ask and that they want to know is, well, where do I start? And it can be very difficult to find an entry point if you're going in on your own, if you're not, like, you know, studying with someone, or if you're not working under a teacher. So yeah, the purpose of this video is just to give you a little idea of maybe where you can jump in if you're curious about Buddhism, and specifically if you're curious about Zen Buddhism, which is one of the schools of Buddhism. So let's jump right in then. My first recommendation is this book. It's The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. Now, a disclaimer, this is written from a Western perspective, clearly. Alan Watts was a British-American philosopher, writer, Buddhist. He lived for many years in a Buddhist community. I think it was in California. Most Western Buddhism is in California, especially in the 20th century. But yeah, so that's the first disclaimer, just to be aware that it is from a Western perspective. If you're coming into Buddhism as, you know, someone living in the West, as a white person, or as someone who whose culture is not, you know, where Buddhism came from, right? It's good to be aware that when you're reading something through the Western perspective, it's going to necessarily miss something in translation, right? So you're not going to get the kind of the full, unfiltered understanding from the source, and I think that's really important to remember. Now, that said, Alan Watts does talk about that in the book. He talks about language, he talks about how certain ideas are necessarily lost in the translation of, I think he's mostly talking about Chinese Buddhism, but he does talk about Japanese, or maybe I am misremembering. Anyways, he does talk about how sort of certain ideas or certain concepts cannot be expressed quite as well in English, right? He talks about English as specifically a dualistic language, right? Which is kind of not what you want when you're trying to express Buddhist or Zen concepts. Now, all that said, this is a very good book. I think it is an excellent introduction to Zen Buddhism. It makes it very accessible to us in the West, right? So he talks about, of course, he describes Zen itself, you know, sort of what it is or what it isn't, and how it functions, sort of what it looks like in practice. He talks about, but before that, and I think this is quite useful, he talks about sort of how Zen developed, like the historical background. So he talks about Taoism as well, and he talks about how that led into and informed a lot of the ideas and the practice of Chinese Buddhism, or Chan Buddhism, which would later become Zen Buddhism as it moved to Japan. So yes, if you're looking for a really, like, straightforward, easy to understand, accessible, and, like, I would say largely easy read, then I would start with this book. But keep in mind that it's only a start, it's only an introduction, right? Okay, so my second recommendation is this book. This is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And this was compiled based off a collection of talks by the Zen Buddhist Shunryu Suzuki, this guy. So this book is excellent. It's very practical. It's very straightforward. Gives you lots of sort of very, like, I don't like this word, but very, like, meaty descriptions, very, like, clear and concise descriptions of, like, you know, very simple things that are important to practice, like how to sit, and, you know, sort of the right things to focus on or not focus on, and generally how you want to lead yourself into your practice. It's also very clear. It's very easy to understand. It's not very long, and it comes from the perspective of an Eastern Buddhist. So, but yet he was giving these talks while living in the United States, right? In, I think it was San Francisco. And so he is making an effort to sort of translate the concepts of Zen Buddhism in a way that a Western audience can understand, right? Based on our own cultural, philosophical, spiritual traditions. And I think he does a really, really good job. So yeah, this one is highly recommended. It has some really, really, I don't want to say catchy, but some really, like, memorable sentences that really help to direct your attention to places where I think it should go, right? He says, you know, things like, it's good as a primer, because, like, at first, he says, you will have various problems in your practice, but it is necessary for you to make some effort to continue. For the beginner, practice without effort is not true practice, right? For the beginner, the practice needs great effort. Especially for young people, it is necessary to try very hard to achieve something. Like, it's obvious, but sometimes you need to hear the obvious thing, right? And that's what I like about it. And it doesn't talk down either, which is cool. Okay, now my third book here is not for the faint of heart. And I would not necessarily call this an introductory book, but I do want to include it because I think it's really, really important. So this book, The Philosophy of Zen Buddhism, by Byung-Chul Han. If you are not accustomed to reading philosophy, I would not recommend it because it's very dense. It's short, but it's dense. You will run into some truly mind-warping sentences that are very difficult to unpack. But, you know, he says things like, hiking along with the wind would be a unique form of dwelling, one that is on friendly terms with finitude. You dwell in, walk through finitude. It's a little bit too flowery sometimes. It's a little bit too dense sometimes to make it accessible, but I think it's very beautiful, very important, and as you get further into your practice and as you want something a little meatier, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, I highly recommend it because it changes the way that you think. It changes the way that you approach things, not just in Buddhism, but in many realms of life, and I think that's the sign of a very, very impactful book. So if you're looking for something crunchy, highly, highly recommend. So, yes, those 3 books, but especially The Way of Zen and Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I think these are 2 pretty foundational books that you'll want to check out if you're getting into Zen Buddhism. Beyond that, there are so many resources available online. You've probably already found some of them if you're looking into learning about Buddhism. I will put a longer list down in the description. And by the way, these books, I'll put them in the description as well if you want to reference it. But some like Buddhist creators that I really like. Doug's Dharma, I think he does a fantastic job of sort of introducing a more academic side of Buddhism, which is very good. There's the website Dhamma Talks, which has translations of, you know, a huge chunk of the Buddhist canon, of the scriptures. If you're going to jump into that, I would recommend starting slow, and some of the sutras are easier to understand, easier to read than others. I would recommend you start with the Dhammapada, which is kind of like a collection of poetry. I think it's a much more gentle way to be introduced into Buddhism, and that website, by the way, is in the tradition of Theravada Buddhism, so it's not Zen Buddhist, but I think it's still worth checking out if you're curious, and it will give you, because you know the concepts that Theravada talk about are more or less the same concepts within every school of Buddhism, right? There's that sort of universal. There's a reason that we call it Buddhism, right? Regardless of the school, these concepts are the same, essentially the same, no matter which school you're practicing within. It's just the practice looks a little bit different. Maybe the areas that a different school will focus on look a little bit different. But I think it is a very good idea to familiarize yourself with the sutras, with, you know, the canon and the scriptures and the Buddhist writings, because it will give you a deeper, fuller, more holistic understanding of what you're learning. And then, beyond simply reading, which I think is one aspect of practice, and Shunryu Suzuki would call it, you know, food for the brain, the reading. The other very important thing is simply practicing, right? So whether that comes in the way of meditation or like personal reflection or whatever it is, actually putting in that practice is a good way to begin, and making a habit of it, you know? And be gentle with yourself as you're learning, right? It takes a long time to learn anything, and I think learning a whole spiritual tradition, philosophical tradition, is not going to happen overnight. It is literally like learning a language, so be kind to yourself, and take time, and don't try to rush things, and try not to feel frustrated at where you are in your progress. Just take your time. It's okay. There's no, you know, the path is going to wait for you, so you don't need to rush. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, if you want a recommendation like on a specific topic, feel free to leave a comment. I wish you well, and take care.